I'm gonna have to go in here and grab a cup of coffee. So come on, let's just do this up in here, all right? I'll take you with me. How about that?
Have you ever felt?
Are you listening? Are you ready? Damn. Yeah. Yeah.
My name is Hameen Phillips, and you're watching the Sticky Web Domains channel. If you're new to my channel, I want to welcome you to the Sticky Web Domains Nation. And if you're already a subscriber, well, welcome back. So today I'm talking about 8 things that engineers hate the most from new conductors and switchmen. Okay, so number 1, the first thing that engineers absolutely cannot stand is teeny-weeny small hand signs. All right, they hate it. An engineer has a rear view mirror. It's got to be about that big. So when you're giving them little baby hand signs, they can't see you. They absolutely do not know what you're doing. So if you do not want to make your engineer angry, give them nice, wide, big hand signs. That is very important if you want to make everybody on your crew happy, especially the engineer, because he's the one that has to see what you're doing, read your hand signs, so he knows, for example, how many car counts you're giving him, how close to the next car he is so that he can make a joint. It's very important to communicate that information with your engineer, and big hand signs is going to help you to achieve that. So you definitely do not want to make your engineer upset by not being within his range of sight. If the rear view mirror is, that's all he can see is through that mirror. So if you're not within range of that rear view mirror, he can't see you, then, he has no idea what you want him to do. So rule number 1, give an engineer big, wide hand signs and make sure that you are in sight so that he can see what it is that you're trying to do and the hand signs that you're trying to give them. Okay, that's very important. I want you guys to remember that one, especially big hand signs, and always make sure you're within sight of that engineer so that he can see you at all times. Because if an engineer cannot see you, they're supposed to stop the train and not even make a move. So make sure that you are in sight of that engineer. Number 2 is going to be too much use of the radio. So the engineer absolutely does not like radio chatter that is unnecessary. So my advice to you is to use hand signs whenever possible. Too much use of the radio is just too much chatter, and there's no need for everybody in the whole terminal to hear everything you guys are saying or everything that's going on. So if you guys can minimize your use of the radio, then I highly suggest you do that. You can do that by using hand signs, of course, and just telling your engineer, okay, I'm going to go to the mitt. And what that means is that you're going to get off the radio and you're going to hand signs, and your engineer will be watching for you, and he'll be watching your hand signs, and he will follow those instructions from what you're doing on the ground with your hands. So rule number 2, do not use the radio if it's not necessary. Engineers absolutely hate it. The third thing engineers absolutely hate, and I mean they cannot stand it, is when a conductor or switchman dumps the air. For example, you're putting together 2 glad hands and then you have to cut the air in, right? Well, sometimes you can, when you open that angle cock, you can bring that air through the train too fast. And if that air goes through too fast, you're going to do what they call dumping the air. And engineers absolutely cannot stand that, because then they have to recharge the air on the whole train, and that can take a while to do it. So do not dump the air. So when you're sending air through that whole train, do it nice and slow. Open an angle cock slow and gradually bring that air, open it up so that that whole train will get some air nice and slow and gradually. Because when you open that angle cock too fast, you're going to send that air too fast, and that causes the whole train to just dump the air. Then it has to recharge the compressor and all that, and it's just a big pain in the butt, right? So, number 3, do not dump the air on the engineer. All right, so pay attention to this one, because this one is important. And this is rule number 4, the wrong verbiage. And when I say that, I mean, you got to be careful what you're saying when you're working on the railroad, because you could say one thing and somebody else can think it means something totally different. So, the wrong verbiage is not good. Okay, use proper verbiage. And let me give you an example of what I mean. So, a lot of guys have this habit when they become switchmen or conductors, and you tell the engineer, okay, go ahead and back up. Say what? That's 2 things you're telling them to do. You're saying go ahead and back up all at the same time? No, that doesn't make sense. They can either go ahead or they can back up, but they can't do both. So, one thing the engineers absolutely hated is when people give them the wrong verbiage. So do not confuse your engineer by telling him to go ahead and back up. Just tell him go ahead or back up, but don't tell them both. Very confusing. And not only that, but when you're dealing with confusion, when you're being very confusing on the railroad, it could cost someone their life. So proper verbiage is very important. So make sure you're relaying that information to your engineer best as possible without confusing him. So tell him to go ahead or tell him to back up, but do not tell him to go ahead and back up. Okay? Don't do it. Engineer won't like it. Rule number 5. This is really gonna make your engineer upset, like for real. If you tell him you forgot your switch keys. Switch keys are something you should have on you at all times. For those random switches out in the middle of nowhere that just so happen to have a lock on them, and you might get in the habit of working in the yard, and when you work in the yard, you don't need your keys because there are no locks. But if you're working on the road or you're doing like a transfer because you're you're slotting industries, or maybe you're just pulling some cars from an industry, you most likely will see locks on some of those switches in between your destination. So if you get in the habit of not bringing those switch keys with you, that could be bad, and that could waste a lot of time, because if you don't have your switch keys and the engineer doesn't have his switch keys, that means that maybe you have to call for a utility guy to bring you some, or a yard master, or a train master, or it could just be a lot of time wasted, and you're going to make a lot of people upset. They have to stop what they're doing to bring you a switch key so that you can throw a switch. So get in the habit of always carrying those switch keys. I gotta admit, I'm guilty of that, but I was lucky because my engineer actually had a copy of switch keys on him. But had he not, I would have been screwed. So always bring switch keys with you, and make it a habit to always have it on you. And another thing I recommend you have is a pen. That way, if something changes within the route, or a dispatcher tells you that a certain crossing is being put out of service, you have a pen to write down the milepost or where it's at, or whatever information you may need to write down. You can do that if you bring your pen. You will not believe how many people forget to simply bring a pen with them when they're working in the yard, or slotting industries, or even just being a conductor on a train. You might just forget a pen. So I highly recommend you put a pen somewhere so you will always have it. And when you get your backpack, put those switch keys right there on that backpack so you do not forget those. Because that's two things you don't want to do, is forget a pen and your switch keys. Very important and very big way to make your engineer upset. Do not do it. Have it on you at all times. Okay, so we're going to talk about number 6. Flat out confusion. Confusing your engineer because you may not know all the rules properly, or it's just something you don't want to do. You don't want to confuse the engineer. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. Let's say, for example, you're in the yard switching, and you need to cut over or cut through some cars to get to another track that you're going to be working on. And let's say you tell the engineer, okay, I'm going in between a standing cut on track 12. However, there's no need to tell them that, because you guys aren't working on track 12, or you're not doing anything that has to do with track 12. So all you really have to do is simply cut between those cars, since you're not working on it, and nothing can possibly go wrong because no one's on that track. So again, do not confuse your engineer with telling him details that you do not have to tell him, because I made that mistake myself, and this is why I'm letting you guys know that all the extra details you might say that you don't have to say, it's just going to confuse the whole crew or the engineer, and that just causes more problems. Okay, so rule number 7. Know the orientation of where your engineer is on the engine. And what that means is that if you guys are working on a locomotive that has 2 engines attached to it, which is common because it just gives more power and it moves more cars, you got to know which engine the engineer is actually on, because you might be trying to give him hand signs and he's on a whole nother engine on a whole nother side. And I've done that. I'm guilty of that myself plenty of times. So I'm letting you guys know right now to know the orientation of the engine you guys are working from, or just where the engineer is within those 2 engines. because it can be very confusing when when you're working with two engines and you just don't know which side the engineer could be working from, or sometimes the engineer just might change engines because maybe he's going a different direction and he thinks it's easier to change sides than to move backwards and not have as great visibility. So knowing which engine your engineer is working from is going to make it a whole lot easier on you and him, because then you know where to be at to give them hand signs, and also it's just safer to kind of know what's going on and what your engineer is doing. So always know the orientation of your engineer and what engine he is working from, okay? And lastly but not least, number 8. Be familiar with the yard or the industries you guys are working at. And I know that's going to be hard to do as a new hire because you're going to have no clue all the switches and all the tracks and all the industry tracks. It's just a lot. So what I suggest you do is get a playbook, which is more than likely a map to the yard or a map to industries, and it's basically just going to help you get more familiar with the industries or the yard by looking at a map of it. And I know with BNSF, they call it playbooks. I don't know what they may call it at other railroads. So just find out what you're going to need, but just basically tell them you want a map of the yard and the industries that you guys are going to be working with, because engineers absolutely hate it when you guys are working and you have no clue of where you're at, where things need to be, what switches need to be thrown. It irritates them, and it just makes their day just a lot harder when the switchmen or the conductors just don't know what's going on. So ask for a playbook. If you have to, cut a page out, get it laminated, and carry it with you on every job you go on until you're familiar with that. All right, that's all I got for you guys. So if you guys like this video, hit that like button below. Also, share it. If you think this video can be helpful to anybody, don't forget to share this video, because we're a community. We're not keeping secrets here. Plus, sharing is caring. And if you're not a subscriber, subscribe to this channel. I have no clue why you haven't subscribed yet. Hit that alerter bell next to that so that you know when I'm online and when I'm posting new material. Also, I go live quite a bit. So if you hit that alerter bell, you're going to know when I'm live so you can catch all of my videos. Until the next time, you guys, I guess I'll see you on the rails. Peace.